Terrific. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, look, we'll kick off with harvester fires today, and I guess I just wanted to bring a couple of tips and tricks to you, given it's been a little bit of a wet year, and some of those things can definitely contribute to prevalence of harvester fires. And I suppose I just wanted to show you this little graphic first. 2016, I don't know if everyone remembers, 2016 was a pretty tough year for fires. We had quite a few around the place. And that's because there was a fair bit of mould and mould dust around the place. And this year's sort of shaping up very similarly. And let's hope I'm wrong. But I do hope that, the rainfall map there on the left-hand side through the growing season is mimicked a little bit by the one on the right, which is this current year. And I should add that's only up to the end of August, so it's probably a little bit wetter than that. So look, potentially this is a year we need to be extra vigilant, I suppose is my point. Potentially wet years like this, the fuel flammability level is actually quite high as well. And we end up with a fair bit of dust settling on exhausts and creating issues, incendiaries that drop down onto the machine. And we'll talk a lot about that today and how we might get around that. So look, the other contributing factor, obviously, to harvester fires is the crop type. And it'll be no surprise to anyone who's grown chickpeas before to know that they're top of the tree in terms of, this is some survey data from a stack of farmers from around the country. We asked them whether they'd had a harvester fire, and if they had, what crop they were in. We asked them a lot about the machine operating conditions and potentially what started the fire. So I'll run through some of that data. But yeah, as you can see, chickpeas, big red flag there. And if you've got chickies in this year, that's definitely something to bear in mind. Lentils, very high as well, not necessarily shown in the graph, and that's probably got a bit to do with the fact that the area of planting is relatively low compared to some of those others, which is why cereals is pretty high as well. So looking at where fires have occurred in harvesters, and these are the little dots there represent losses exceeding $100,000 worth of damage. From a survey of about 300 from that 2015 to 17 period, increasing levels of losses, yellow, orange, red, up to black is a complete machine loss. And look, obviously we're looking at a pretty small sample of a smallish sample here. So you've got to remember that total losses across the country that year probably were or in those years were probably much worse. But I guess the point here is I'm wanting to highlight the fact that you guys are operating in an area where there are potentially fires, and there have been instances before. And again, just reiterate the point that you need to be really vigilant. Now, I know later today you're going to be talking about harvest weed seed control, and I did want to just mention this one. If you do have a weed seed mill or impact mill or a chaff mill, whatever you'd like to call it, HSD, Terminator, Redicop, STU, you need to be a little bit more vigilant. These things produce a lot of fine dust, and I just wanted to slot that slide in right up front so that that's in the back of your mind in the context of everything we're going to talk about. The mills probably raise the stakes a little bit in terms of making sure that we keep things clean, and we'll talk a lot about how we can get around that. But if we look at the cause of fires on harvesters, and again referring back to that survey data, there's one that really stands out, which is dust and trash build up across the machine, accounting for 50% of the fires that are in that survey. And we can do something about that, and we'll talk about that in a tick. The other one there that we can actually also do something about is bearing failure, and we can be a little bit more vigilant there. Now, a couple of others that sort of stand out that are small, but again, potentially could be more problematic this year, given we've got a few mice around the place, electrical faults and hydraulic and fuel systems. Just make sure in your pre-harvest checks that you pay special attention to electrics this year. I suspect that there might be a few mice-chewed wiring looms around the place that might need a bit of maintenance or at least a little bit of love pre-harvest, just to make sure that they aren't going to either have a short or a low conductivity and therefore high resistance heat sort of build up. Make sure you just have a bit of a look at those electrical lines and harnesses and make sure they're in good nick. So look, let's look at the most obvious one, which is the dust and trash build up. Now, it's the most basic of requirements when we're harvesting, just to make sure the machine's clean in terms of preventing fires. most people are happy with a piece of pipe with maybe a flared end and a tap on it to try and blow things down. I guess I'm here to tell you there are other options out there, and the Brooder wand there on the, it's like a mega force, I think they call it. It's about $600. It's on the left-hand side of the screen there. And you'll notice it's got a little Venturi end on it. And so what that does is, you need about 120 CFM compressor to drive this thing, but it also pulls in a lot of volume at that nozzle sort of tip and shifts a lot of material. So we tested these, or Kondinin Group tested these last year with a few growers. And I think all of those that tested it ended up buying one because they just said it was a great big gear. So look, we don't necessarily plug particular items, but that's definitely worth a look if you've got a compressor to run it. And the other thing I'd say is, the higher voltage battery leaf blowers are getting much better now. They've got a lot more oomph behind them, and they can shift a bit of material. So they're a potential option to keep in the cab as well, just to blow down problem areas or frequently occurring areas more often. So you got this in the cab, you're more likely to jump out, give things a bit of a blow down if you get the opportunity, and jump back in the cab and continue on. So that's a potential option as well. But look, the other thing from that survey was the bearing temperature, and a quick show of the room, hands in the room. Who's using one of these infrared thermometers? Anyone? A few. For those that haven't got one, how many have you got there, you reckon, Tom?
Oh, about 40 old. It's meant to be registered. I don't know how many here. About half.
Yeah, well, about half. So look, for the other half, if you haven't got one, worth grabbing one. Just any auto store will have them. They're between 50 and $100. You can pick them up at Bunnings, etc. as well. And look, the great thing about these little infrared thermometers is that you can go around the machine and check bearing temperatures, and then keep a bit of an eye on what's going on. You know what I mean? So what it means is that while I can't tell you definitively what temperature a particular bearing is going to fail at, you'll at least have a bit of an idea as to if there's a rapid increase in operating temperature, and that tells us that failure is imminent and that we need to get onto it before it does fail and spray hot metal everywhere and potentially cause a fire. So grab yourself one of those. They're a pretty cheap bit of gear and just good insurance at the end of the day. Now, speaking of insurance, this is the best insurance system you've probably got. It's a couple of extinguishers, and I'd recommend 4 on any machine. I like to see a powder ABE, so that's the white stripe, along with a water extinguisher at the front steps and also around the back of the machine, because that's where you're probably going to have most of your problems, and you don't want to be racing back around to the front of the machine to get the extinguisher. So why the water as well? Well, you can have water or just a pump up pack, so you've at least got some water on hand with the harvester to put out any spot crop fire that might sort of occur as a result of a small smolder or fire on the harvester. So make sure you can you've got something like that to put out those small crop fires. And of course, the white powder extinguisher is the one that you use for your fuels and electrical fires. And just a couple of tips with those ABEs is that you can get some clumping in the bottom of those over a period of time. So look, every 6 months, I just recommend picking those up, turning them over, make sure you can hear the material moving around inside. Otherwise, if it has clumped, it won't work particularly well. And the other tip is just if you have used it at all, make sure you get it professionally recharged, because the powder moving through the seals on those things will mean that the seal won't hold pressure over a longer period of time. And so you will need to get it professionally recharged. So yeah, I think as long as you've got some options in terms of extinguishers, those two are a good start, front and rear. Now, some of the other stuff I'm going to run through now is pretty basic, but I think it's probably worth just touching on. If you've got the opportunity to harvest into a prevailing wind, that's definitely worth doing. It doesn't always happen. It's not always the way the paddock's set up, but if you've got that opportunity, by all means use it. And the reason we do that is obviously because if you do have incendiaries that are coming off the machine, they're not going to blow into a standing crop, which is potentially going to burn a lot easier than the ground that's already been harvested. And so that mode of harvest, I suppose, if it's available, is the one to go for. Another thing to look at during your pre-harvest checks is just make sure your concave access doors are well sealed up. So over a period of time, those seals can fail a little bit. They can get damaged. Sometimes the latching mechanism doesn't quite come down as tight as it probably did when it was new. And the problem with that is that if you think about where those concave access doors sit, inside the harvester is under a little bit of pressure, air pressure. And so what you tend to get is small puffs of chaff and fine material blowing straight up And of course, where's that going to go? Straight onto the exhaust system, which is potentially sitting at about 200 degrees. And the problem with that is that we might get little bits and pieces stuck on that exhaust system that then fall down into dust and trash around the machine, and then that's where a fire starts. So in a majority of cases, the exhaust system is where we tend to find, or it tends to be the culprit when it comes to where the initial smolder started. And I think, make sure that those concave access doors are well sealed up, minimises the amount of material that's going to be pushed up there out of the harvester. So let's have a look at the exhaust system options. As I said, over a period of time, those exhaust systems get a little bit rough and tend to have material stick to it, smoulder, and then drop down. So there's two things we can do. The first is we want to make sure that the surface is nice and smooth. And the second thing is if we can at all get some sort of insulative effect there to minimise the surface temperature, that's going to help us reduce harvester fires as well. So let's start with the cheapest of options. This is a product called Metal Fix. It's by a company out of Perth here called Phoenix Paints. This stuff's not terribly expensive, $60 a litre. And you want about 5 coats of this stuff, and you'll end up with almost like an enamel sort of smooth finish on the outside of any exhaust components. It tends to last quite well. I've seen machines that have done sort of 4 seasons after this has been applied and it's still in good nick. So that's potentially one option just to increase the smoothness of that of the exhaust system and prevent material sticking onto it so easily. Now, the more expensive sort of option to get that nice smooth finish, not to mention a pretty trick chrome looking system, which most bogans would be pretty happy with around the place, I imagine, rev heads. This zirconia-based ceramic coatings are used pretty extensively in northern New South Wales and southern Queensland in chickpeas, and the beauty of the ceramic coatings is that they do two things. One is they still provide you with that smooth finish that the likes of the paints do as well, but they also provide you with an insulative property, so they actually reduce the surface temperature of some of those components. Now, they have to be pulled off, sent away. It's like a powder coating sort of process, if you like, but definitely worth looking into if you're having continued problems. Going further along that insulative properties options list is this product called fibrefracks. I don't know if anyone in the room's used it before. It does need to be applied very slowly and carefully in probably 4 or 5 sort of layers, and then requires a fair bit of time to cure. And if it doesn't cure slowly, what you end up with is this linear crack. You can see a little bit on the left-hand side in that image, and what happens there is once you've got those cracks, material or dust and whatnot will get in there and potentially smoulder. So it's, again, probably a little bit more problematic in itself, even though you are reducing the surface temperature a bit. Other options are the exhaust bandages. Again, we're borrowing stuff from the drag racing and motorsport industry. The bandages are great in that they reduce surface temperature, but they do have a rough surface finish, and that potentially can trap dust over time. So sometimes that's used in combination with something like fibrefracks. Mining industry's been looking for insulative options for quite a while. They've used these jackets, and in fact, Larwoods across the border there have used these in the past as well and gone away from them for the very reason that just in the way that these things latch together. So they're really high insulative effect blanket, but they have to latch together, and sometimes dust can get in underneath the way they fasten and still create problems. So they've moved away from those and gone to a double skin, which I'll talk about in a bit. Now, aside from making that exhaust system smooth and less hot, if you like, creating an insulative layer, the other option we've got is to push air across it. But I guess this comes with a bit of a caveat in that, one, we don't want to change airflow too much to the point where we're potentially going to create some low pressure areas on the harvester that are going to trap dust. But the other thing is that we need to make sure the fasteners that keep these things in place aren't also going to trap dust, and that's a potential problem as well. So, of course, we've got other options, including pressurized airflow across the machine. And, the intent there is pretty good. You want to try and keep things blown down and keep air moving across those hot surfaces. I would just suggest that I reckon a little bit more R&D here required in terms of I'd love to see that that air that's blown across those components go through some sort of pre-filtration, make sure it's nice and clean, because the last thing you want to be doing is pushing dust and material onto those hot areas. And also, again, coming back to what we said before about shifting airflow, we need to make sure that we're not potentially going to create negative air pressure pockets, which then might trap dust. So just be very cautious about, where that air is blowing. And as I said, manufacturers spend a fair bit of time making sure that that air moves across that engine bay, if you like, and doors are all sealed up pretty tight there to try and push air exactly where it needs to be. We just need to make sure we don't muck with that too much to make, and inhibit the original design of the airflow across the machine. Look, one thing I just wanted to show you is some work being done in the US on this front. They've got a full, enclosure that sits around all exhaust components, which is then pressurised. And so a positive pressure system like that with, as you can see, pre-filtered and filtered air, pre-cleaned and filtered air, means that jacket, that full enclosure is always under constant pressure and dust shouldn't get in there. And by all accounts, this works pretty well. It is under patent in the US, but they have offered it for us to use it if we're interested in giving that a try. The double skins I mentioned that Larwood's used, now they use a combination of both ceramics, the double skins, some fibrefracks, as you can see here, is that double skin transitions back to the original exhaust system. And so, they've put a lot of work in over a long period of time. It is only available on machines from them. It's not a system that they want to put risk against. But everyone I've spoken to says that this works pretty well. So, of course, the double skin works like your thermos, in that you've got that air gap layer in there that actually is a pretty good insulator. Now, do these things work? Absolutely. Some thermography work that I was lucky enough to do back of a harvester and on a bloody hot day on the Eyre Peninsula. We've got some thermography work here from a CR9090. Now, that exhaust would typically sit well over 200 degrees, but we've got surface temperatures there of about 134, which is below where we'd expect the likes of lentil dust to smoulder. It sort of tends to smoulder about that 160, 155 odd degrees in work that Dr. Graham Quick did many years ago. So we know that we're sort of below that threshold. What about static energy? Look, I'm afraid static isn't going to start fires, and we do point to that a few times and say, oh, it must have been static because we don't know what it was. You're not going to get any argument from me that static does contribute to the fuel load on a machine, and that's problematic because, as we said before, if we've got fuel on the machine or dust and trash around the machine, that's going to potentially cause issues if there is a spark floating around the place or a smoulder. Look, the three bar charts here, I don't know how well you can read the text there, but Dr. Graham Quick, when he was with us, went around and tested a lot of machines for static energy. And the typical static energy on a machine was around about 30 millijoules. The most he measured anywhere was about 140. And then he went back to the lab and said, all right, well, how much static energy do we need to actually start the most flammable of dust, being lentil dust? And the highest, the minimum he required was 500 millijoules, and that was in a continuous arc. So I guess what I'm telling you is that we can't blame static for starting the fire, but it potentially can contribute to the fuel load on the machine. And look, if it makes you feel better, drag a chain, but don't drag that down the road. I hear that's happened recently there somewhere. Is that right, Tom? Look, I think someone might have had a chain on a machine down the road there on the way to the sports oval there. But anyway, look, we won't go too far into that. Preparation is absolutely essential, and so options we've got is a permanent fixture on a machine, pressurised full fire suppression system on a machine. Mining industry's been using it for years. We're looking at a system that is triggered at about 180 degrees, either with an airline pressure drop or an electrical trigger line that runs around the machine. That picks up where there's a fire, and if that's triggered, it discharges the contents of the fire extinguishing tank there that sits on the machine that's under pressure. It can also be manually tripped as well. An alternative is these small fire knockout bombs, 1.5 and 5.5 kg options. They're normally tied up in the machine somewhere or kept in the cab so they can be thrown into a fire area on the machine if there is one. And these things, you can see the red straps on top. They're actually like a fuse, so they do go off with a fair bang. I guess the warning with those is that if you do have them tied up around the machine, you smell a bit of smoke and you're going up looking for it, probably don't stick your head too close to those because they do go off with a fair bang. Okay, so they will put tyres out. There's a website that apparently they're a little bit hard to get a hold of, but I did manage to track some down if you guys are chasing them. Look, if you take nothing else away from this talk today, one thing I would like to point out and really encourage you to do is just sit down with your team pre-harvest and talk about what's going to happen if there is a fire, right? Who's going to be responsible for what? Who's going to go where? Who's going to contact, whoever they need to contact, either the relevant authorities or neighbours or whoever it might be. Make sure you've got all those numbers and UHF channels stored somewhere in the cab so they're easy to access. And also, I'd encourage people to just train staff in understanding the fire danger index and getting an idea as to when they potentially should pull up under certain environmental and ambient conditions. So, high winds, low relative humidity and high temps. There will be some GRDC harvest fire back pocket guides kicking around there today. I'd encourage you to grab one of those. It does have an FDI chart in it and talks about how to work that out. So grab a couple of them and maybe give them to staff. Maybe leave one in the header cab as well. So if you are unfortunately in a harvester that catches fire, I'd encourage you to get out of there as quickly as possible. Pull out of the crop. Push the harvester or point the harvester into the wind if you've got that opportunity, and then enact that communications plan. If you've got the opportunity, again, use your fire extinguishers. But look, at the end of the day, remember that harvester is replaceable. Give it your best shot, but don't put your life in danger. These things can be replaced. That's what insurance is for. And while we're speaking of insurance, just make sure pre-harvest that your insurance policy is up to date and that everything you need on it is covered. So I'll just point that one out. And look, a sober reminder that if you do have problems with the machine, or you're running a couple of machines in one paddock, don't park them up on residue trails. They're potentially an issue here, which was pretty problematic for one particular contractor on the first day of harvest. One machine, which you can see sort of smouldering over on the left-hand side there, he had issues with all day, parked it up, put the other two machines away, but unfortunately on a header trail that linked them up to the first machine, which did catch fire overnight and burnt. And then the header trails subsequently lit up and burnt out the other two machines as well. So, yeah, not a great story, and particularly given it was the first day of harvest for this guy. Just a reminder that that's something you want to try and avoid at all costs. So, Tom, I'm happy to take any questions or if there's any discussion from the floor about harvester fires or any thoughts, tips, or tricks that people might have used to stay on top of fires in the past.
Hi, Grant. Has anyone got any questions to Ben start off with? Anything they want to share from their own experiences around harvest fires? Back here, Mike, mate.
Just with the
Yep. Should be. Sorry. Try again. Yeah, it's just down.
Yeah. Okay.
You're right.
With the chains, just over the years, I've read a lot of different ideas on that. Whether one chain is going to go down the line of chains, is one chain enough, or do you need 6? Or even need 12? So,
yeah, you know what? I'd actually even question whether chains work terribly well at all. Has anyone measured the electrical resistance in a chain? Not good. So, I'd actually suggest that, the problem with static and the problem with trying to dissipate energy is that we're operating in an environment that's not conducive to dissipating static energy. We're in an environment where we're creating a fair bit because it's really, really dry. So relative humidity is low, temperatures are high. And so discharging is actually quite difficult. And if anything, tyres have got a stack of carbon in them these days, and they're probably as conductive, if not more conductive than dragging chains. So look, as I said, if it makes you feel better, drag a chain, perhaps drag it off the front. That's I've heard a few people suggest that. that they pull the chain off the front, and that makes them feel better. But you know, in that work that Graham Quick did, there was no difference in machines that were pulling chains to those that weren't, with regard to static energy. So yeah, take that on face value. But that's the research work that's been done.
And I'm just curious, you spoke about having the positive pressure technology in the US that's still on patent, and that it might be available for trial in Australia. How do people get a hold of that or get involved with that if they want to be?
Look, that's something that I've been working on with a while with a US researcher. So if people are interested in that, give us a buzz. I'm more than happy to share the details. The conversations I've had with him, they've got issues in the US with corn pits. So the internal structure of the corn plant can get quite fluffy and settle on the exhaust and then drop down on the machine. Same issues that we've got, with light fluffy chickpea leaf, etc., and or lentil leaf, and the evidence that they've got is that this actually works really well. And they've just got to make sure that is pre-cleaned. So. Happy to share those details if anyone wants to get in touch, and it'd be a really interesting project to do just to see how it goes. It's not terribly complex. The hardest bit is actually making up the templates that fit around particular exhaust systems, and they're happy to share those with us. So yeah, get in touch if that's something you're interested in.
Absolutely. Does anyone else have anything they want to add? Chris, you holding the mic up? No? I will share a story with you we heard at the start of the week. It's around these fire bombs and also around good communication. So there was a guy up in Kondinin, Simon Craig, his name is, one of the best boardmen. Actually, he has 2 new hold harvesters. He sent the chaser bin and the first harvester out of the paddock as they finished up, and he was just cleaning up a little bit of the headlands. He started a fire on his machine. Immediately called his backpacker and said, come back in, we've got a fire on this machine, we need to put it out. And the backpacker drove the other header in instead of driving in and chasing in with the fire suppression unit on it. So that's the first thing. Make sure you do have a good plan, and everyone who's working for you knows what that plan is, where the fire suppression units are, what to bring back in. You don't want to bring another header back in, burning 2 things down. The other thing he had was a heap of those fire bombs strung up in his engine bay and one sitting in the cab. And he just chucked one of them straight at the fire, and it went bang, and it put it straight out. And we looked at that machine on Monday, and the fuel filter's half melted, but it hasn't gone pop. So it was that close to going straight through the fuel. So having something on board that you can put something out with quickly is a really important thing to do. Anything else before we move on, or any more questions for Ben? He will be hanging around for a little bit longer to talk about harvest losses from the front. Ben, I was thinking maybe we should get together a list of resources, list of links of where we can find some of that equipment and the products that you've been talking about to purchase.
Yeah. No troubles at all. And I know that that I can put a list together. That's no worries at all. There is a little bit of detail in that back pocket guide, but certainly, the likes of the infrared thermometers and the fire bombs, that's no troubles at all. Happy to put a list together, Tom, and we can share those.
Excellent.
I was just going to say, just to add to that, we've also got, Ben spoke about some of the Harvester Fire back pocket guides and things. If we haven't got them here today, they're all available online, and we'll send around some links and things after the event. That's
right. Unfortunately, being the last one of the 3 best workshops, you guys are short on resources. Unfortunately, we've given them all away. So
sorry, no worries. They are online, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I keep meaning to tell you that before we start, Ben, and every day you say it, and ran out and choose that. So we'll move on.
No worries. We'll chat to you again soon, guys. Thanks very much.
No worries.